Chapter 8. Damned If You Do. Morton, a psychologist on the staff of a private clinic, has a problem with the clinic director, Roberta. At staff meetings, Roberta generally opens discussion of issues by asking all staff members for their opinions. She invites debates about the pros and cons of proposals, but somehow, when the meeting ends, they always end up deciding by consensus to do what Roberta thinks best. The women on the staff are happy with Roberta as a director. They feel she listens to their points of view and they like the rule by consensus rather than fiat. But Morton feels Roberta is manipulative. If they are going to do what she wants anyway, why does she make them waste their breath expressing opinions? He would prefer she just lay down the law, since she is the boss. Morton's impression that Roberta does not act like a boss is the result of style differences. She is acting like a woman boss. She prefers to rule by consensus, and the women on her staff like it that way. But he is frustrated by her indirectness. He thinks she should rule by fiat. Style differences may also be partly responsible for the observation that some women who have achieved high status or positions of authority do not behave in ways appropriate to their positions. But there may be another factor at work too. Since Martina Horner's pioneering research, many psychologists have observed that women seem to fear success. Again, the research on children's play sheds light. Take Marjorie Harness Goodwin's research on verbal routines by which the preteen and teenage girls in her study criticized each other behind their backs. Significantly and sadly, the examples Goodwin mentions are based on success. Girls are criticized for appearing better than the others in the group. Of two disputes that Goodwin describes, one girl's offense was to skip a grade in school and get straight A's on her report card. The other girl incurred the wrath of her peers by wearing newer and more expensive clothes than they. In my own study of videotaped conversations among friends, a similar complaint is lodged by the 6th grade girls against another girl. Shannon. She's gotta wear a polo every day. Julia. I know. Well, I like polo. But God. Shannon. Every day? Julia. Really? Shannon. Just think how much and she's putting herself up. Appearing better than others is a violation of the girl's egalitarian ethic. People are supposed to stress their connections and similarity. In light of these and many other studies of girls' real conversations, it is no wonder that girls fear rejection by their peers if they appear too successful and boys don't. Boys from the earliest age learn that they can get what they want, higher status, by displaying superiority. Girls learn that displaying superiority will not get them what they want, affiliation with their peers. For this, they have to appear the same as, not better than their friends. The appearance of similarity does not mean actual sameness. Penelope Eckert, who spent several years with high school students in a Midwestern city, explains how complex the girls' system of masked status can be. For example, the popular girls are the ones who must determine when to switch from the clothes of one season to the clothes of the next. For example, from winter to spring clothing. If the less popular girls show up wearing cotton clothes while the popular girls are still wearing wool, they have committed a gaffe, shown themselves to be outsiders. If they switch after the popular girls have appeared in cotton, they mark themselves as followers, limited to public information. The goal is to dress in unison. If they make the switch on the same day as the popular girls, they are gloriously the same and have subtly proven that they are in the know. Never boast or brag. Another aspect of the pressure on girls not to appear better than their peers is the injunction not to boast. Gender differences in attitudes toward boasting are the cause of much mutual misjudgment and judgment between men and women, and some odd verbal behavior on the part of women. For example, a college student named Connie was telling her friends that a high school advisor had tried to talk her out of applying to the college they were all now attending. The advisor had felt that Connie's applying will hurt the chances of another girl from the same high school, Sylvia. In explaining the advisor's thinking, Connie said, Sylvia's grades weren't, it sounds so pompous of me, but Sylvia's grades weren't as good as mine. Sylvia could barely bring herself to make a simple factual statement about her grades because it smacked of boasting. Margaret and Charles are both successful lawyers. Though they get along perfectly well when alone, they occasionally find themselves arguing after dinner engagements with new acquaintances, especially people who have status and connections in tax law. Charles's specialty. Margaret feels that Charles boasts. He lets it be known how important he is by mentioning recognition he has received, cases he has won, and important people he knows. In Margaret's view, name dropping. In his eagerness to impress, he sometimes embellishes what he has done and implies that he knows people he has actually met only once or twice. For her part, Margaret tries to hide her success. She deliberately avoids letting on if she knows important people whose names arise in the conversation, and she never alludes to her many accomplishments. Charles is as frustrated by Margaret's behavior as she is by his. If she will not let on how important she is, he does it for her. This upsets her even more. She feels his boasting for her is as impolite as her doing it herself, and all the alternatives she can imagine are unappealing. She can ignore or disrupt Charles's attempts to speak for her, which seems rude to him, and violates what she feels is an obligation to support him. She can let him talk for her, which frames her as a child who cannot speak for herself, or she can participate and speak in a way she does not want to speak, boasting. Margaret feels people will not like her if she boasts. She would rather they learn from others how successful she is, and she feels they will approve of her modesty when they do. She also fears people will not like Charles if he boasts, and this is upsetting to her because she is affiliated with Charles. So, what people think of him is a reflection on her. Charles, on the other hand, feels that people will not respect him unless he lets them know he merits respect. He also feels they will respect Margaret more if they know she is an accomplished attorney, not just his wife. Both Margaret and Charles judge each other's ways of talking in terms of personality characteristics, and each also places moral value on style. Margaret assumes that a good person is modest and self effacing. Charles considers displaying accomplishments to be a requirement, not a liability, and he regards Margaret's, to him, false modesty as foolishly self denigrating, evidence of insecurity. Each one thinks she or he is simply expecting the other to be a good person, but their definitions of a good person vary because of the differing expectations for a good girl and a good boy. The reluctance of girls and women to boast in certain situations shows up in two strikingly similar examples that I encountered in vastly different contexts. Ingmar Bergman's Scenes from a Marriage opens with a couple being interviewed for a magazine by a woman named Mrs. Palm. Marianne and Johann respond very differently to Mrs. Palm's question, how would you describe yourselves in a few words? This is Johann's answer. It might sound conceited if I described myself as extremely intelligent, successful, youthful, well balanced, and sexy. A man with a world conscience, cultivated, well read, popular, and a good mixer. Let me see, what else can I think of? Friendly, friendly in a nice way, even to people who are worse off. I like sports. I am a good family man. I have no debts and I pay my taxes. I respect my government, whatever it does, and I love our royal family. I have left the state church. Is this enough, or do you want more details? I am a splendid lover. Aren't I, Marianne? This is Marianne's answer. What can I say? I am married to Johann and have two daughters. Even with prodding, Marianne doesn't add much information. Marianne. That's all I can think of for the moment. Mrs. Palm. There must be something. Marianne. I think Johann is rather nice. Johann. Kind of you, I'm sure. Marianne. We've been married for 10 years. Johann. I've just renewed the contract. Marianne. I doubt if I have the same natural appreciation of my own excellence as Johann. But to tell the truth, I'm glad I can live the life I do. It's a good life, if you know what I mean. Well, what else can I say? Oh dear, this is difficult. Johann. She has a nice figure. Marianne. You're joking. I'm trying to take this thing seriously. I have two daughters, Karen and Eva. Johann. You've already said that. I was reminded of this fictional conversation when I read the following real life dialogue in Carol Gilligan's A Different Voice. As part of her research exploring children's moral development, Gilligan interviewed two 11-year-old children named Emmy and Jake. Among the questions she asked them was, how would you describe yourself to yourself? I heard loud echoes of Johann and Marianne in Jake's and Amy's responses. First, here is how Jake responded. Perfect, that's my conceited side. What do you want anyway that I choose to describe myself? Interviewer. If you had to describe the person you are, that you yourself would know it was you, what would you say? I start off with 11 years old. Jake, last name. I'd have to add that I live in town because that is a big part of me. And also that my father is a doctor because I think that does change me a little bit. And that I don't believe in crime except for when your name is Heinz. A reference to a previous question Jake was asked. That I think school is boring because I think that kind of changes your character a little bit. I don't sort of know how to describe myself because I don't know how to read my personality. If you had to describe the way you would actually describe yourself, what would you say? I like corny jokes. I don't really like to get down to work, but I can do all the stuff in school. Every single problem that I have seen in school I have been able to do, except for ones that take knowledge. And after I do the reading, I've been able to do them. But sometimes I don't want to waste my time on easy homework. And also, I'm crazy about sports. I think, unlike a lot of people, that the world still has hope. Most people that I know I like, and I have the good life, pretty much as good as any I have seen. And I am tall for my age. This is how the girl Amy answered the question. You mean my character? What do you think? Well, I don't know. I'd describe myself as, well, what do you mean? If you had to describe the person you are in a way that you yourself would know it was you, what would you say? Well, I'd say that I was someone who likes school and studying, and that's what I want to do with my life. I want to be some kind of a scientist or something. And I want to do things. And I want to help people. And I think that's what kind of person I am. Or what kind of person I try to be. And that's probably how I'd describe myself. And I want to do something to help other people. Why is that? Well, because I think that this world has a lot of problems, and I think that everybody should try to help somebody else in some way. And the way I am choosing is through science. What struck me about these two children's answer to the same question was first how much longer Jake's was, and I assume ellipsis after hope indicates even more words were omitted, and how boastful it was, in contrast to Amy's statement, which was not boastful at all. Jake says he's perfect. His father is a doctor. He can solve every single problem at school, even though he finds school boring. He has the best life he has seen, and he's tall. It is possible that his comment, "Sometimes I don't want to waste my time on easy homework," might be a defense of less than superior achievement at school. In contrast, Amy says she likes school and studying, but doesn't say if she does well at it, and that she wants to help people through science. Both Johann in Bergman's screenplay and Jake in Delikin's interview are aware that they sound conceited and make a joke of it. In fact, Johann's entire answer seems tongue in cheek, like his comments interspersed in Marianne's answer. But Jake and Johann say what they do nonetheless. Though Amy has a bit more to say than Marianne, it isn't that much more. Both Amy and Marianne repeat themselves rather than fulfill the request in a way that might sound like bragging. Marianne does not mention that she is a lawyer. Amy says she plans to be a scientist, but she emphasizes that her purpose will be to help others rather than to achieve money, fame, or status. Women's feeling that they should not boast come from explicit training as well as peer pressure in childhood. Such training is described in the alumni newsletter of one of the most academically challenging girls' high school in the country. In this newsletter, a woman wrote an epitaph to her sister, who had been the very top student in her graduating class and who had recently died. A brilliant woman. Her sister had had a moderately successful career that did not reflect her spectacular ability. The writer comments that her sister took too much to heart her mother's admonitions. Stay in the background. Never brag. Always do your best. These examples demonstrate that women are expected not to boast in relatively public situations. But it would be misleading to imply that women never boast at all. I return to the couple I dubbed Margaret and Charles for an example of a context in which she boasted, but he felt he would not have. In the situation described earlier, Margaret felt Charles should not show off to new acquaintances. On another occasion, Charles felt that Margaret was inappropriately boasting. In complaining to close friends that she had not been promoted to partner as quickly as men in her firm, who had brought in much less business and had far fewer billable hours, Margaret enumerated her early successes. Charles told her later that he thought this had been insensitive, since one of their listening friends was a young lawyer who was not advancing quickly at all. To Charles, self-aggrandizing information is to be used in public to achieve status, appropriately displayed when first meeting people who have or seem to be claiming superior status. But to Margaret, self-aggrandizing information is to be used only in private, appropriately revealed in report talk conversations with people she knows and trusts who will not judge her for her pride. When dealing with close friends, she forgets about their relative status, an aspect of relationship that Charles never forgets. The different lenses of status and connection may once more work against women. Women are reluctant to display their achievements in public in order to be likable, but regarded through the lens of status, they are systematically underestimated and thought self deprecating and insecure. It is tempting to recommend that women learn to display their accomplishments in public to ensure that they receive the respect they have earned. Unfortunately, however, women are judged by the standards of women's behavior. This was evident, for example, at a faculty meeting devoted to promotions, at which a woman professor's success was described. She was extremely well published and well known in the field. A man commented with approval, "She wears it well." In other words, she was praised for not acting as successful as she was. By implication, if she had acted in a way consonant with her achievement, she would not have been praised, and perhaps would not have been liked. Her politeness is her powerlessness. There are many kinds of evidence that men and women are judged differently even if they talk the same way. This tendency makes mischief in discussions of men, women, and power. If a linguistic strategy is used by a woman, it is seen as powerless. If it is done by a man, it is seen as powerful. Often, the labeling of women's language as powerless language reflects the view of women's behavior through the lens of men. Because they are not struggling to be one up, women often find themselves framed as one down. Any situation is ripe for misinterpretation because status and connection are displayed by the same moves. This ambiguity accounts for much misinterpretation by experts as well as non experts, by which women's ways of talking, buttered in a spirit of rapport, are branded powerless. Nowhere is this inherent ambiguity clearer than in a brief comment in a newspaper article in which a couple, both psychologists, were jointly interviewed. The journalist asked them the meaning of being very polite. The two experts responded simultaneously, giving different answers. The man said, "Subservience." The woman said, "Sensitivity." Both experts were right, but each was describing the view of a different gender. Experts and non-experts alike tend to see anything women do as evidence of powerlessness. The same newspaper article quotes another psychologist as saying, "A man might ask a woman, 'Will you please go to the store?' Where a woman might say, 'Gee, I really need a few things from the store, but I'm so tired.' The woman's style is called covert, a term suggesting negative qualities like being sneaky and underhanded. The reason offered for this is power. The woman doesn't feel she has a right to ask directly. Granted, women have lower status than men in our society, but this is not necessarily why they prefer not to make outright demands. The explanation for a woman's indirectness could just as well be her seeking connection. If you get your way as a result of having demanded it, the payoff is satisfying in terms of status. You are one up because others are doing as you told them. But if you get your way because others happen to want the same thing or because they offered freely, the payoff is in rapport. You're neither one up or one down, but happily connected to others whose wants are the same as yours. Furthermore, if indirectness is understood by both parties, then there is nothing covert about it. That a request is being made is clear. Calling an indirect communication covert reflects the view of someone for whom the direct style seems natural and logical, a view more common among men. Indirectness itself does not reflect powerlessness. It is easy to think of situations where indirectness is the prerogative of those in power. For example, a wealthy couple who know that their servants do their bidding need not give direct orders, but can simply state wishes. The woman of the house says, "It's chilly in here," and the servant sets about raising the temperature. The man of the house says, "It's dinner time," and the servant sees about having dinner served. Perhaps the ultimate indirectness is getting someone to do something without saying anything at all. The hostess rings a bell and the maid brings the next course. Or a parent enters the room where the children are misbehaving and stands with hands on hips, and the children immediately stop what they are doing. Entire cultures operate on elaborate systems of indirectness. For example, I discovered in a small research project that most Greeks assumed that a wife who asked, "Would you like to go to the party?" was hinting that she wanted to go. They felt that she wouldn't bring it up if she didn't want to go. Furthermore, they felt she would not state her preference outright because that would sound like a demand. Indirectness was the appropriate means for communicating her preference. Japanese culture has developed indirectness to a fine art. For example, a Japanese anthropologist, Harumi Bafu, explains the delicate exchange of indirectness required by a simple invitation to lunch. When his friend extended the invitation, Befu first had to determine whether it was meant literally or just pro forma, much as an American might say, "We'll have to have you over for dinner sometime," but would not expect you to turn up at the door. Having decided the invitation was meant literally and having accepted, Befu was then asked what he would like to eat. Following custom, he said anything would do, but his friend, also following custom, pressed him to specify. Host and guest repeated this exchange an appropriate number of times until Befu deemed it polite to answer the question. Politely, by saying that tea over rice would be fine. When he arrived for lunch, he was indeed served tea over rice as the last course of a sumptuous meal. Befu was not surprised by the feast, because he knew that the protocol required it. Had he been given what he had asked for, he would have been insulted. But protocol also required that he make a great show of being surprised. This account of mutual indirectness in a lunch invitation may strike Americans as excessive, but far more cultures in the world use elaborate systems of indirectness than value directness. Only modern Western societies place a priority on direct communication, and even for us, it is more a value than a practice. Evidence from other cultures also makes it clear that indirectness does not in itself reflect low status. Rather, our assumptions about the status of women compel us to interpret anything they do as reflecting low status. Anthropologist Eleanor Keenan, for example, found that in a Malagasy speaking village on the island of Madagascar, it is women who are direct and men who are indirect. And villagers see the men's indirect way of speaking, using metaphors and proverbs, as the better way. For them, indirectness, like the men who use it, has high status. They regard women's direct style as clumsy and crude, debasing the beautiful subtlety of men's language. Whether women or men are direct or indirect differs. What remains constant is that the women's style is negatively evaluated, seen as lower in status than the men's. It's different coming from a man. Research from our own culture provides many examples of the same behavior being interpreted differently depending on whether it's done by women or men. Take, for example, the case of tag questions, statements with little questions added onto the end, as in, "It's a nice day, isn't it?" Linguist Robin Lakoff first pointed out that many women use more tag questions than men. Though studies seeking to test Lakoff's observations have had somewhat mixed results, most support it. Jacqueline Sachs, observing the language of children as young as 2 to 5, found that girls used more than twice as many tag questions as boys. And research has shown that people expect women to use tags. Psychologists David and Robert Siegler conducted an experiment asking adults to guess the sex of speakers. Sure enough, the stereotype held. Subjects guessed a woman was speaking when tags were used, a man when they weren't. The stereotype can actually be more compelling than reality. In another experiment, psychologists Nora Newcomb and Diane Arnkoff presented adults with communications in which men and women used equal numbers of tag questions and found that their subjects thought the women had used more. Most troubling of all, men and women are judged differently even if they speak the same way. Communication researcher Patricia Hayes found that when women used tag questions and disclaimers, subjects judged them as less intelligent and knowledgeable than men who also used them. When women did not give support for their arguments, they were judged less intelligent and knowledgeable, but men who advanced arguments without support were not. In other words, talking in ways that are associated with women causes women to be judged negatively. But talking the same way does not have this effect on men. So it is not the ways of talking that are having the effect so much as people's attitudes toward men and women. Results. Many other studies have similar results. Psychologists John and Sandra Condry asked subjects to interpret why an infant was crying. If they had been told the baby was a boy, subjects thought he was angry. But if they had been told it was a girl, they thought she was afraid. Anne Mack and Lauren Richardson with Judith Cook discovered that when students judged professors, generating more class discussion was taken to be a sign of incompetence, only if the professor was female. Silence is golden or leaden. Research itself has fallen prey to this double standard. In studies claiming that men exert power by talking more than women, women's silence is cited as evidence that they have no power. At the same time, other studies claim that men's use of silence and refusing to speak is a show of their power. A theme running through Mira Komarovsky's classic study, Blue Collar Marriage, is that many of the wives interviewed said they talked more than their husbands. He is tongue-tied, one woman said of her husband. My husband has a great habit of not talking, said another. More of the wives want to talk and have their husbands talk about problems. In contrast, more husbands withdraw in the face of troubles. When I don't feel good, I light out and don't dump my load on them. Emotional stress or a wife's demands. Yet there is no question but that these husbands are dominant in their marriages. Taciturnity itself can be an instrument of power. Komarovsky quotes a mother who says of her husband, "He doesn't say much, but he means what he says, and the children mind him." Jack Settle believes men use silence to exercise power over women, and he illustrates with the following scene from Erica Young's novel, Fear of Flying. The first line of dialogue is spoken by Isadora, the second by her husband Bennett. "Why do you always have to do this to me? You make me feel so lonely." "That comes from you." "What do you mean it comes from me? Tonight I wanted to be happy. It's Christmas Eve. Why do you turn on me? What did I do?" Silence. "What did I do?" He looks at her as if her not knowing were another injury. "Look, let's just go to sleep now. Let's just forget it." Forget what? He says nothing. Forget the fact that you turned on me? Forget the fact that you are punishing me for nothing? Forget the fact that I'm lonely and cold? That it's Christmas Eve and again you have ruined it for me? Is that what you want me to forget? I won't discuss it. Discuss what? What won't you discuss? Shut up! I won't have you screaming in the hotel. I don't give a fuck what you won't have me do. I'd like to be treated civilly. I'd like you to at least do me the courtesy of telling me why you're in such a funk. And don't look at me that way. What way? As if my not being able to read your mind were my greatest sin. I can't read your mind. I don't know why you're so mad. I can't intuit your every wish. If that's what you want in a wife, you don't have it in me. I certainly don't. Then what is it? Please tell me. I shouldn't have to. Good God! Do you mean to tell me I'm expected to be a mind reader? Is that the kind of mothering you want? If you had any empathy for me. But I do. My God, you don't give me a chance. You tune out. You don't listen. It was something in the movie, wasn't it? What? In the movie? The quiz again. Do you have to quiz me like some kind of criminal? Do you have to cross-examine me? It was the funeral scene. The little boy looking at his dead mother. Something got you there. That was when you got depressed. Silence. Well, wasn't it? Silence. Oh, come on, Bennett. You are making me furious. Please tell me, please. He gives the words singly like little gifts, like hard little turds. What was it about that scene that got me? Don't quiz me, tell me. She puts her arms around him. He pulls away. She falls on the floor holding onto his pajama leg. It looks less like an embrace than like a rescue scene. She sinking, he reluctantly allowing her to cling to his leg for support. Get up! Crying, only if you tell me. He jerks his leg away. I'm going to bed. This painful scene seems to support Sattle's claim that Bennett uses silence as a weapon against his wife. Each successive refusal to tell her what's bothering him is like a blow, laying her lower and lower until she is literally on the floor. But would our interpretation change if we reverse the genders in this scene? With genders reversed, the scene seems impossible. It is hard to imagine a man begging his wife to tell him what he did wrong. What leaped to my mind when I tried to reverse genders was a scene in which the man withdraws, disabling her silence as a weapon. What makes Bennett's silence so punishing is Isidora's insistence on making him talk to her. It is the interaction of the two styles, his withdrawal and her insistence that he tell her what she did wrong, that is devastating to both. If Bennett shared Isidora's belief that problems should be talked out, or she shared his practice of withdrawing when problems arise, they would not have found themselves in this devastating scene. I'm sorry, I'm not apologizing. There are many ways that women talk that make sense and are effective in conversations with women, but appear powerless and self-deprecating in conversation with men. One such pattern is that many women seem to apologize all the time. An apology is a move that frames the apologizer as one down. This might seem obvious, but the following example shows that an apparent apology may not be intended in that spirit at all. A teacher was having trouble with a student widely known to be incorrigible. Finally, she sent the boy to the principal's office. Later, the principal approached her in the teacher's lounge and told her the student had been suspended. The teacher replied, "I'm sorry," and the principal reassured her, It's not your fault. The teacher was taken aback by the principal's reassurance because it had not occurred to her that the student's suspension might be her fault until he said it. To her, "I'm sorry" did not mean "I apologize." It meant "I'm sorry to hear that." "I'm sorry" was intended to establish a connection to the principal by implying, "I know you must feel bad about this. I do too." She was framing herself as connected to him by similar feelings. By interpreting her words of shared feeling as an apology, the principal introduced the notion that she might be at fault and framed himself as one up, in a position to absolve her of guilt. The continuation of this story indicates that these different points of view may be associated with gender. When this teacher told her grown daughter about the incident, the daughter agreed that the principal's reaction had been strange. But when she told her husband and son, they upbraided her for apologizing when she had not been at fault. They too interpreted "I'm sorry" as an apology. There are several dynamics that make women appear to apologize too much. For one thing, women may be more likely to apologize because they do not instinctively balk at risking a one down position. This is not to say that they relish it, just that it is less likely to set off automatic alarms in their heads. Yet another factor is that women are heard as apologizing when they do not intend to do so. Women frequently say "I'm sorry" to express sympathy and concern, not apology. This confusion is rooted in the double meaning of the word sorry. This double meaning is highlighted in the following anecdote. A 12-year-old Japanese girl living in the United States was writing a letter of condolence to her grandmother in Japan because her grandfather had died. The girl was writing in Japanese, but she was more accustomed to English. She began in the appropriate way, "I'm so sorry that grandfather died." But then she stopped and looked at what she had written. "That doesn't sound right," she said to her mother. "I didn't kill him." Because she was writing in a language that was not second nature to her, this girl realized that an expression most people use automatically had a different meaning when interpreted literally. "I am sorry" used figuratively to express regret could be interpreted literally to mean "I apologize." The difference between literal and ritual uses of language is also at play in the following example. A businesswoman named Beverly returned from an out-of-town trip to find a phone message on her answering machine from her division head. The message explained that he had found an enormous number of errors in a report written by her assistant. He told that he had indicated the errors, returned the report to the assistant, and arranged for the deadline to be extended while she typed in the corrections. Beverly was surprised, since she had read and approved the report before leaving on vacation. But she said, "I'm sorry," and was offended when he said, "I'm not blaming anyone." It seemed to imply that he was blaming her, since he introduced the idea. "Please don't accept my apology." Beverly asked her assistant to show her the lengthy corrected report and became angry when she saw that half the pages had errors marked, but few were actually errors. Nearly all involved punctuations, and most were matters of stylistic preference, such as adding commas after brief introductory phrases or before the conjunction "and." In a large number of cases, she felt that her division head had introduced punctuation errors into sentences that were grammatically correct as they stood. Later that day, she encountered the division head at an office party and announced as soon as she saw him that she was angry at him, and told him why. She realized by his reaction that she had offended his sensibilities by raising the matter in front of someone else. She immediately apologized for having blurted out her anger rather than expressing it more diplomatically, and she later visited him in his office to apologize again. She was sure that if she apologized for having confronted him in the wrong way at the wrong time, he would counter apologize for having overcorrected the report and for going directly to the assistant instead of through her. Instead, he generously said, I accept your apology, and affably changed the subject to office politics. Now, accepting an apology is arguably quite rude. From the point of view of connection, an apology should be matched, and from the perspective of status, an apology should be deflected. In this view, a person who apologizes takes a one down position, and accepting the apology preserves that asymmetry, whereas deflecting the apology restores balance. Although she felt immediately uncomfortable, Beverly did not realize until after she had left the office, all smiles and goodwill, that not only had her division head rudely accepted her apology, but he had not offered a balancing one. Women's and men's differential awareness of status may have been the cause of Beverly's problem in a more fundamental way, too. She felt quite friendly with her division head. She liked him. She had come to think of him as a friend. For her, as for many women, being friends means downplaying, if not obliterating, status differences. When she blurted out her anger, she was not thinking of herself as upbraiding a superior in front of others. To the extent he remained aware of the difference in their status, despite their friendly relationship, to accept her criticism would have amounted to public humiliation. Had she focused on their status differences rather than their friendship, she would not have approached him as she did. She would not, for example, have taken that tack with the company president. Women adapt to men's norms. In all these examples, the styles typical of men are generally evaluated more positively and are taken as the norm. In a related and perhaps even more distressing asymmetry, when men and women are in groups together, the games they play are more likely to be men's games than women's. In Ursula Le Guin's story In and Out, a former secretary recalls an all women meeting, like when the group of secretaries met to plan a meeting to talk about women in the city government, and the meeting had been so terrific. People saying things they didn't even know they thought, and ideas coming up, and nobody pushing anybody around. By implication, an interchange in which people got to say what they were thinking and nobody was pushing anybody around was not the norm for meetings she had participated in or observed, but a quality that distinguished this meeting in which only women participated. A professor commented on how pleasant she found it to work on all women committees as compared to the mixed gender committees she was more used to. But when she made this observation at a mixed gender dinner party, a man strenuously objected. He said he had noticed no difference between all men committees and those that included women. This man was surely telling the truth as he experienced it, because when men and women get together, they interact according to men's, not women's, norms. So, being in a mixed rather than a same gender meeting makes less difference to men than to women. Research in a range of disciplines shows that women make more adjustments than men in mixed groups. Elizabeth Berries found, in comparing the body postures of young men and women in all male, all female, and mixed discussion groups, that the men sat more or less the same way whether or not there were women present. They sprawled out in relaxed positions, taking up a large amount of space around them. The women in her study, however, drew themselves in, assuming ladylike postures when there were men in the group, but relaxed and sprawled out when there weren't. In other words, men took the same physical positions whether or not there were women present, but the women seemed to feel they were on stage when men were there, backstage when they found themselves with women only. A similar point emerges from a study by Alice Deakins of the topics men and women talk about. Deacon did what is called an eavesdropping study. While sitting alone in a dining room where bank officers had lunch, she noted what people at adjacent tables were talking about. This was not a situation where the men were executives and the women their wives and secretaries. The men and women in Beacon's study were all bank officers, meeting as equals at work. Deakins found that when there were no women present, the men talked mostly about business and never about people, not even people at work. Their next most discussed topic was food. Another common topic was sports and recreation. When women talked alone, their most frequent topic was people. People at work so much as friends, children, and partners in personal relationships. The women discussed business next, and third, health, which included weight control. When men and women got together, they tended to avoid the topics that each group liked best and settled on topics of interest to both. But in discussing those topics, they followed the style of the men alone. They talked about food the way men did, focusing on the food they were eating, and about restaurants rather than diet and health. They talked about recreation the way men did, focusing on sports and vacations rather than exercising for diet or health, as the women did when they were alone. And they talked about housing in the way men did, focusing on location, property values, and commuting time rather than the way women did, focusing on the interiors of houses, for example, layout and insulation, and what goes on among people inside houses, for example, finding cleaning help. In analyzing tape recordings of private conversations among teenagers, Deborah Lynch found a similar pattern. When the girls were alone, they talked about problems in their relationships with their friends. When boys were alone, they talked about activities and plans and made comments about friends. When boys and girls were together, they talked about activities and plans and made comments about friends. In other words, when boys and girls talked together, they talked more or less the way the boys talked when there were no girls present. But when girls got together with no boys present, they talked very differently. All these and many other studies show that male-female conversation are more like men's conversations than they are like women's. So when women and men talk to each other, both make adjustments, but the women make more. Women are at a disadvantage in mixed sex groups because they have had less practice in conducting conversation the way it is being conducted in these groups. This may help to explain why girls do better at single-sex schools, whereas boys do about the same, whether they go to boys' school or co-education ones. It may also explain why the women, but not the men, in Aries' study of college discussion groups said they preferred the same gender group. All of these studies help to answer the question of why women are dissatisfied with communication in their relationship with men, while men who are parties to the same conversations express less dissatisfaction with them. The talk that takes place at meetings and discussion groups is relatively more public, more like report talk. Considering their preference for report talk, it is not surprising that many women find it hard to get the floor at meetings, even though many men have a hard time getting the floor in conversations with women who are overlapping to build rapport. One reason many women find it difficult to get and keep the floor at meetings with men is that they won't compete for it. However, this chapter has presented only a few of many studies showing that even when women do behave the same way as men, they get different responses. This raises the question of how much women's difficulty in getting heard at meetings results from their ways of talking and how much from their being women. This question also throws into relief the asymmetry of options available to men and women. Equal discrimination. Many women tell of having made a comment at a meeting or a conference that is ignored. Later, a man makes the same comment and it is picked up, approved, or discussed, attributed to him rather than her. Most women feel that this happens because people are less likely to pay attention to an idea that is raised by a woman, and the studies mentioned above indicate that there is truth to that. But the way ideas are raised may be a factor too. The following experience indicates this, but it also indicates that men and women do not have the same options available. Professor A, who teaches biochemistry at a major university and is well known in his field, told me of the following experience. Having a diffident style and being timid about speaking in public, he geared up his courage to speak following a public lecture in the biology department. He phrased his observation as a question. Have you considered this chemical influence on the biological process you just described? The lecturer responded in effect, "No, I haven't," and the point was dropped. Soon after, however, another man, Professor B, spoke up. He began, "I would like to return to the point made by my colleague Professor A, because I think it is very important." He then repeated the point in a long winded way. The idea then became the focus of extended discussion, and everyone who spoke to the issue began by saying, "I'd like to comment further on the important point raised by Professor B." Had Professor A been a woman, it would have been natural to assume that the idea was first ignored because it was expressed by a woman, and later taken up because it was expressed by a man. But in this case, both speakers were men. So their gender could not have been the cause of the different responses they received. What was different was the way the two men expressed the same idea. Perhaps Professor A had not explained his idea in enough detail to allow others to see its importance. More likely, the way he spoke, diffidently, briefly, and phrasing his point as a question, framed his idea as not important, whereas the way Professor B spoke at length and in a loud declamatory voice framed the same idea with a different meta message. This is important. Take note. This example is important because it sheds light on the role played by how people speak regardless of their gender. But it also shows that women are at a disadvantage, since women are more likely than men to phrase their ideas as questions, take up less time with their questions, and speak at lower volume and higher pitch. The example shows that men who do not use the forceful strategies associated with masculinity are also at a disadvantage. In this sense, Professor A was at the same position as a woman who speaks in the same way. Unequal remedies. But in another sense, Professor A's position is very different from that of a woman who has a similar conversational style. If Professor A decided to adjust his style to be more like Professor B's, he would find himself commanding more attention in public if that's what he wants. And in the process, he would better fit the model of masculinity in our culture. But women who attempt to adjust their styles by speaking louder, longer, and with more self assertion will also better fit the model of masculinity. They may command more attention and be more respected, but they may also be disliked and disparaged as aggressive and unfeminine. Indeed, a woman need not be particularly aggressive to be criticized. A professor who invited a prominent woman researcher to speak to his students was shocked to hear some of his students, both male and female, comment later that they had found her arrogant. He had seen nothing arrogant about her at all. She simply hadn't engaged in any of the womanly behavior they had come to expect, such as continually smiling, qualifying her statements, or cocking her head in a charming way. Ways of talking associated with masculinity are also associated with leadership and authority. But ways of talking that are considered feminine are not. Whatever a man does to enhance his authority also enhances his masculinity. But if a woman adapts her style to a position of authority she has achieved or to which she aspires, she risks compromising her femininity in the eyes of others. As a woman who has achieved a high level of status in my profession, I grapple with this contradiction daily. When I go to academic conferences, I often meet colleagues from other universities who know me only by my scholarly publications and reputation. Not infrequently, new acquaintances say that they are surprised that I am so nice or so feminine. "You're not what I expected," I have repeatedly been told. "You're not aggressive at all," others have remarked. "I thought you'd be cold or hard or competitive." When I press them about why they expected that of me, I am told, "I just figured that any woman who is as successful as you would have to be that way." Just such assumptions emerge from a study by Harriet Wall and Anita Berry of college students' expectations about male and female professors. The researchers gave students identical materials on prospective professors, information about their academic backgrounds, publications, and letters of recommendation, and asked the students to predict how the candidates would do if hired, including their chances to win a distinguishing teaching award. Some who read the materials under a woman's name predicted that she would not win the award because, as one writer put it, "too much business, not enough personality." No one made inferences like this when exactly the same file was read under a man's name. Another reason women professors may be judged more harshly than men, Wall and Berry found, is that students expect more of women. Those who thought they were evaluating a woman expected her to be more nurturing and to devote more time to her students outside of class than those who thought they were evaluating a man. The researchers point out that in evaluating real professors, students might have more praise for a male professor than for a female who actually devotes more time to them, because the woman is, after all, just doing what is expected, while the man is doing more than expected. In reading this study, I was, of course, reminded of the graduate student who had called me at home on Sunday because she didn't want to bother her dissertation director at home. Language keeps women in their place. Nowhere is the conflict between femininity and authority more crucial than with women in politics. The characteristics of a good man and a good candidate are the same, but a woman has to choose between coming across as a strong leader or a good woman. If a man appears forceful, logical, direct, masterful, and powerful, he enhances his value as a man. If a woman appears forceful, logical, direct, masterful, or powerful, she risks undercutting her value as a woman. As Robin Lakoff shows in Language and Woman's Place, language comes at women from two angles: the words they speak and the words spoken about them. If I wrote, "After delivering the acceptance speech, The candidate fainted. You would know I was talking about a woman. Men do not faint, they pass out. And these terms have vastly different connotations that both affect and reflect our images of men and women. Fainting conjures up a frail figure crumpling into a man's rescuing arms, the back of her hand pressed to her forehead, probably for little reason, maybe just for dramatic effect. Passing out suggests a straightforward fall to the floor. An article in Newsweek during the 1984 presidential campaign quoted a Reagan aide who called Ferraro a nasty woman who would claw Ronald Reagan's eyes out. Never mind the nastiness of the remark and of the news magazines using it to open its article. Applied to a man, nasty would be so tame as to seem harmless. Furthermore, men do not claw, they punch and sock, with correspondingly more forceful results. The verb claw both reflects and reinforces the stereotypical metaphor of women as cats. Each time someone uses an expression associated with this metaphor, it reinforces it, suggesting a journal cattiness in women's character. Even when seeming to praise Ferrero, the articles used terms drenched in gender. She was credited with a striking gift for tart political rhetoric, needling Ronald Reagan on the fairness issue, and twitting the Ronald Bush campaign for its reluctance to let Bush debate her. If we reverse object and subject, needling and twitting would not sound like praise for Reagan's verbal ability or any man's. I will refrain from commenting on the connotations of tart, assuming the word's double meaning was at least consciously unintended. In his book, The Language of Politics, Michael Geiss gives several examples of words used to describe Ferrero that undercut her. One headline called her spunky, another feisty. As Geiss observes, spunky and feisty are used only for creatures that are small and lacking in real power. They could be said of a Pekingese, but not a Great Dane, perhaps of Mickey Rooney, but not of John Wayne. In other words, of any average-sized woman, but not of an average-sized man. I am sure that the journalists who wrote these descriptions of Ferrero came to praise her, not to bury her. Perhaps they felt they were choosing snappy, eye-catching phrases. But their words bent back and trivialized the vice presidential candidate, highlighting, even if unintentionally, the incongruity between her images as a woman and as a political leader. When we think we are using language, our language is using us. It's not that journalists, other writers, or everyday speakers are deliberately or even unintentionally sexist in their use of language. The important point is that gender distinctions are built into language. The words available to us to describe women and men are not the same words. And most damaging of all, through language, our images and attitudes are buttressed and shaped. Simply by understanding and using the words of our language, we all absorb and pass on different asymmetrical assumptions about men and women. Bound by body language. Body language is eloquent too. Political candidates necessarily circulate photographs of their families. In the typical family photograph, the candidate looks straight out at the camera while his wife gazes up at him. This leads the viewer's eye to the candidate as the center of interest. In a well-publicized family photograph, Ferrero was looking up at her husband, and he was looking straight out. It is an appealing photo which shows her as a good woman but makes him as the inappropriate center of interest, just as his finances became the center of interest in candidate Ferrero's financial disclosure. Had the family photograph shown Ferrero looking straight out, with her husband gazing adoringly at her, it would not have been an effective campaign photo, because she would have looked like a domineering wife with a nammy-pammy for a husband. Ironically, it is more difficult for a woman to hold a position of authority in a relatively egalitarian society like that of the United States than in more hierarchical ones. An American woman who owned and edited an English language magazine in Athens told me that when Greeks came to the magazine to do business, as soon as they realized she was the boss, they focused their attention on her. But if her male assistant editor was in the room, Americans were irresistibly drawn to address themselves to him. It seems that Greeks' sensitivity to the publisher's status overrode their awareness of her gender. But Americans, who are less intimidated by status than Greeks, could not rise above their awareness of gender. Much of this book has shown that men's and women's style differences are symmetrically misleading. Men and women learn to use language in the different worlds of boys and girls, and each group interprets the other's ways of talking in terms of its own. But in many ways, differences between men's and women's styles are not symmetrical. When men and women get together in groups, they are likely to talk in ways more familiar and comfortable to the men. And both women's and men's ways of talking are typically judged by the standards of men's styles, which are regarded as the norm. Most distressing in a society where equality is the agreed upon goal and where more and more women are entering high status positions, women in authority find themselves in a double bind. If they speak in ways expected of women, they are seen as inadequate leaders. If they speak in ways expected of leaders, they are seen as inadequate women. The road to authority is tough for women, and once they get there, it's a bed of thorns.